Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 194 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am your host, the Orange Tank Neelan, and with me as always are the red and green tanks, Kellen and Mark. How are you both doing?
Good. Hey.
Happy to be alive.
Yep, every week, Kellen. We are 1 week away from Essen SPIEL happening in Germany, and while I had designs on being there this year, I think for obvious reasons we will not be attending, but that won't stop us from being excited about the games that will be at the show. So this week on the podcast, we're going to be doing our own little preview of our top 5 most anticipated games of Essen SPIEL 2021. That's coming up later in the show, but before we do that, let's talk about some of the games that we've been playing. And this week, Mark's going to be telling us about Praga Caput Regni. I'm going to be telling you about Skulk Hollow, and Kellen's going to be talking to us about last year's most anticipated game of Essen SPIEL, Beez.
One of the most anticipated.
Yes, to be clear. Not the most universally acknowledged anticipated game. But yeah, one of the games that was on our list last year.
It was Kellen's 5th? Was that how it ranked? Did we agree that?
Something like that.
We never go back, but yes, we agreed
Yes.
that that's what it was.
So let's kick it off with Mark. Tell us about Praga Caput Regni.
Praga Caput Regni is the latest from Vladimir Suchy, he of Underwater Cities and Pulsar 2849 and Last Will and Shipyard. I have not played all of his games, but I have been a pretty big fan of the games of his I have played. Shipyard, I think, is a underrated gem. Last Will, I think, is a good game, but it's not one that I like because of the weird nature of it, where you're trying to buy high and sell low. It just throws me off completely. It's antithetical to everything I stand for. I haven't played Pulsar, but really liked Underwater Cities, so I was excited to play Praga Caput Regni, which I think it means Prague, the capital city, something like that.
Pulsar is the only one I've played, Mark.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So what does that make us? One complete man.
That's right. You complete me.
Well, Pulsar, I didn't love. I was super excited to check it out at Gen Con, and Neelan and I actually played it, I think just the one time first. The dice drafting was super great. Super, super, super great. Loved everything about the dice drafting. And then the board happened. And what you do on the board is so inane, or felt so inane to me at the time, that I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't imagine he's my designer.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
my taste, but like, definitely some cool ideas in there.
Interesting. Okay.
It was one of the earliest times I remember the Kellen everything is Eurified to a fault rant. And like, I agree with him. I think that the thing that Pulsar does is it takes like an exciting like premise and kind of like numbs it completely.
Okay, well, let's see him take a perhaps not as exciting premise, the construction of Prague, which is exciting, but I don't think as exciting as sci-fi.
Prague or Praga?
I would assume that the people of the Czech Republic would disagree with your take on that, Kellen, on the importance of the construction of their capital city. But let's get into Prague Caput Regni. It's got a lot of different parts to it, as I think Suchi games tend to do. The base is this action selection aspect. There is a wheel with tiles. Each tile has 2 different actions you can choose from. And depending on where any tile is on the wheel, there will either be a cost or a benefit associated. So if you want to take the build a building action and it was just taken by somebody else, it's going to cost you. Whereas actions that have been as popular are going to rotate down the wheel and become less and less expensive, and in fact can give you victory points if nobody's taken them for a while. The action that you're doing are, again, sort of typical Euro actions. There is the action to
Farm?
Not farm. You can manage your mines or manage your quarries. So there are 2 main currencies in the game, gold and stone. They are used for a couple of different things, but primarily to build buildings and build walls. The way that the managing of the mines and quarries, and it's interesting that they use the term managing mines and managing quarries rather than just like get gold, because whenever you take the action of managing mines or quarries, you have 2 options. The options are identical in quarries or mines. That is either take 1 gold or 1 stone and increase the production of that resource. So for example, if your mine is at a level 2, therefore giving you 2 gold, you can choose to take 1 gold and increase the production to level 3, or conversely, you can choose to take the production at whatever level it's at. So for example, if you're at level 5 of the quarries, you can either take 5 stone when you take the action, or just take 1 stone but increase your production to 6 So further down the line, when you take that action, you'll be getting more stone. It's just a little bit of a twist on resource gathering, but I thought it was a nice little wrinkle. Aside from that, you can take an upgrade action. So when you take that action, it makes whenever you take further actions better. So for example, you could upgrade your construct a building action, and then from that point forward, when you construct a building, you'll get some sort of benefit from that. There is a construct a wall action, which allows you to buy wall tiles at the cost of gold and stone, and then you place them around your little tableau. They will give you points at the end of the game based on how many wall pieces you've constructed, but also you can get further benefits depending on how you sort of link the walls. After that, there's a construct a building action. There's a map. You construct a building. There are ways to get benefits depending on how you construct a building and sort of area majority scoring. And finally, the last action of the 6 that are available is this construct the King's Road action. So cutting across the map, there is the King's Road. And if you take that action, you move your pawn up the King's Road, you get a benefit, and you can spend eggs to get a further benefit. Eggs, as everyone I'm sure knows, were supposed to have been used as the mortar for the bricks. Okay.
Wait, this is really, there's an egg city?
There is an egg city, and it's called Prague.
And is it still standing?
Prague? Prague.
No, it had a great fall.
So those are the 6 actions you can take. There are...
Wait, is everybody supposed to know this about the eggs?
No, I'm kidding.
I didn't
Nobody's
know
supposed to
this.
Yeah, nobody's supposed to know that. That was a joke.
Wait, is it a joke that everyone is supposed to know it, or that they used eggs?
That everyone's supposed to know it.
They used eggs.
They used eggs. I don't even know if that's historically accurate, but that is like the legend of Prague. The one you tell your kids at night.
Yeah, I know. I would say to the people of Prague, dream bigger than that.
So those are the 6 actions that you can take in the game. They also will allow you to trigger moving up different tracks. There's a technology track that will grant you passive powers once you hit sort of threshold on it. There is a university track, which will give you points at the end of the game. And then finally, there are these 2 3D constructions that are on the board. One represents what's called the Hunger Wall, and one is the St. Vitus Cathedral. So there's these 3D constructions with like 4 levels, and depending on actions you take, they can move you up the cathedral and the Hunger Wall, and there is a benefit for landing on different spots in the Hunger Wall and the cathedral, and also you'll score more points at the end of the game depending on how high you are on this wall. So it's sort of like more of an aesthetic thing than anything else. And in fact, you can play it without the 3D cathedral and Hunger Wall and just play it on the flat board, but why would you do that when you have...
Yeah, why? I was going to say, it looks pretty nice.
So it's interesting because the explanation, I think, of Praga makes it sound like your standard Euro. And I think maybe for people who are averse to Euros, this isn't going to turn them around. I don't think this does Euros in a incredibly fresh way, but I do think it does it well. I did enjoy my play of Praga. Maybe it's not like a fresh Euro, but it is I think, well done Euro. You only have 16 turns in the entire game. And it's a situation where the game forces you to focus while also you do need to have a finger in each sort of pie. You won't win by just focusing on any 1 or 2 different aspects, but you also won't win by diversifying too much. So there's a balance you have to keep an eye on when you're playing. Also, there isn't any like combative interaction between the players. There isn't any interaction in that respect, but you'll have a better time if you are keeping an eye out on what your opponents are doing. It does require you to know what your sort of opponents are going for and gunning for, and making sure that you do your best to counteract their plays. So it's a game that has a lot going on without, I think, being overwhelming. I think the rules are pretty straightforward. Once you start playing them, they're pretty intuitive. There's only 6 actions to choose from, and they're all pretty simple. It feels like it's almost like a Lacerda in that way, where you're just choosing one action, but with Lacerda the clock moves and you've got a whole bunch of things to consider. This is not that complicated. There's a much lower barrier to entry, I think, when it comes to... I would consider this probably a medium heavy Euro game, but it doesn't have like a tremendous amount of rules grit that you have to get through to play it.
I think they've had a lot of fun with the presentation of this game. Every time I sort of see pictures of it, there's like wheels on your player board, this giant wheel that's on the center board, this raised bridge for placing workers, and like you said, the 3D buildings. If at the very least you're going to make ye old standard Euro game, you can at the very least present it in a way that it looks vibrant and looks colorful and has some table presence. So kudos to them for that.
Yeah, and I think if you're a fan of Suchi games, I think you'll really enjoy this one. It strikes me a lot like Shipyard, which again, I think is a Suchi that is overlooked, where there's a lot of things going on, but they do sort of blend together well, and it's not an overwhelming amount of things you need to consider on every turn. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to playing it again.
Is this board as big as it looks?
It's big. It doesn't strike me as necessarily over the top big.
I'm just tired of the games that are coming out where the board is huge, everyone has their own player board, and important pieces of information are in one corner of the board, and there's like no sense of the fact that everyone is sitting around a table together.
Right. I guess there is some of that in this game. You do have your own player boards. The board is, I don't think it's outsized, but when you combine that with the individual player boards, there is something to that. And then there is information that is printed in certain places on the board that perhaps could be an issue. But in our play, it wasn't
2 out of
overwhelming.
10. Right. Is that what I heard you say?
That is not what you heard me say, but I would assume that your score would be closer to 2 out of 10 than mine.
I know I'd be interested in trying this. I think as long as the rules take that back. I didn't say that. As long as teaching the rules took less than 30 minutes, I would be excited to try this.
Yeah, I'd say the rules are about 30 minutes, so it's right on the cusp there.
Cool.
So that is Praga Caput Regni by Vladimir Suchi.
So the game that I would like to talk about this week is Skulk Hollow. This is by Pencil First Games. The designers are Eduardo Baraf, Seth Johnson, and Keith Mateka. This is a game that I've had in my collection for a while now that I've been kind of keen to play all throughout last year, but just never got around to. This is a 2-player asymmetric combat game, effectively. It is very heavily modeled or inspired, I should say, by the video game Shadow of the Colossus. So the idea is you have one player who is playing a sort of a huge, looming, giant beast, and the other player is tasked with just bringing them down. The key difference, though, from that video game is the player that is bringing down the monster is this team of what are called foxen, sort of, anthropomorphic fox creatures. They have a leader amongst them, and the aim of the player playing the Colossus, as it were, is to kill the leader or to conquer whatever their specific win condition is, because there are multiple monsters you can play as well as multiple leaders that the foxen player you can play as. So there's a fair bit of variance given that the way the game is going to play, which will give you sort of either unique abilities, or in the case of the Colossus player, either completely different abilities or a different win condition. So, what you're doing in a game of Skulk Hollow, there's a very simple 3x3 grid map. The Foxen players start on one end. The Guardian player, which is what the game refers to these big giants, they start on the other end of the board. And you have a hand of cards. This is a very tactical game where what you're able to do is dictated by the cards you have in your hand. So, I might play a card that allows me to move, or I will play a card that allows me to use my swing ability, which is one of my attack abilities. I only have 2 actions per turn, then it's the Foxen player. They have 3 actions per turn. They choose to play a card from their hand to move. They play a card from their hand to do a melee attack. If they're close enough to the Guardian, to jump onto the Guardian's feet. And then they're climbing up the limbs of the Guardian. So there now are move spots allocated to each of these areas, which are responsible for all of the abilities that the Guardian can do. So if they then damage one of those areas enough, they can disable that ability effectively. So there is a little bit of decision making in which areas of their body you're going to target first in order to take down certain abilities. And this just goes back and forth, drawing cards back up to your hand. There's an action that allows you to prepare just to get some card advantage by discarding and drawing cards. But that's basically the gist of it. It's moving around the board, attacking, playing cards until one of the sides wins by either eliminating the leader or killing the Guardian. Kellen, what did you think of Skulk Hollow?
I think more than anything else, this was one of the first games in a long time where I was jealous of all the children that you have. I think that my biases in the upfront is that I don't typically love games where one person has a ton of power and the other person doesn't, and slowly will chip away at, you were just killing most of my units every turn, and my job was to kill you slowly over time. And so I have definitely a bias against that. Similar to like a one versus all, I just somehow have less fun, even though I know with the end in mind that's how it's supposed to be going. Tactically, turn to turn, I'm just like, wow, I'm getting got over and over again. I think that the game is pleasant, and figuring out what to do with your little units and moving them around the map and jumping on top of the Colossus is funny and fun and light and charming. There's a lot of charm in the production. I was happy that we played it. I will be happy to never play it again. And yeah, I think it hits right about where I thought it was, which is like better than you might expect from the outset. And I like the idea that there are, different guardians that you could use. But again, if I had a small child or a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old, well, my 9-year-old can play heavy games like Agricola, Barrage. But if I borrowed your 8-year-old or 10-year-old that couldn't play anything, then I would play Skulk Hollow with them.
Yeah, no, I think charming is exactly the right word. And I agree with you that I think this would be a lovely family weight game, or even just to play with someone who's drawn to the theme but doesn't necessarily play a lot of board games. Like, I think there is like such a clear simplicity to the way the card play works. Like, it's very simple, and it's hard to be too upset over the course of the game because it just has that sort of very light nature to it. Like, you're going to be drawing cards, seeing what you can do. Oh, I was able to draw the card that lets me win, so that's what I'm going to do. Otherwise the game goes back and forth in that way. Like, there's a little bit of that to it. There is some hand management you could do in terms of preserving cards, but I would say that that's a relatively minor component of the game. I think that the presentation is what sells this to me. I think that the art is delightful. I think that the wooden pieces, each of the Guardians is a unique one for each of them, are lovely. Like, I just think it has a very cool presentation. There is a board for each of the Guardians that represents all of the locations you can go on. You're moving your little fox meeples along them. It's just very cute. It's very, very charming, and I think it plays cleanly. Definitely simpler than a game I would typically go back to, but actually one I'm thinking of hanging on to just for those rare occasions where it might be welcome to have a game of this weight.
Yeah, that reminds me of my favorite part of it, which is that you had like 4 or 5 powers that were tied to locations on your body with different health. And so I wanted to have my archers out just dealing 1 damage over and over again. Like, I always go for the most annoying way to deal damage. Like, that's a given. And so I was like, okay, how can I disable the power of you that affects those troops that are 1 space adjacent from you? And so that gave me a little bit of like, I'm going to target this because then he won't be able to hit my archers.
Yes.
Did it work, Neelan?
It did. Barely. It was very, very close at the end.
Yeah. Well, if one of us is dead, I'll take the barely.
That is Skulk Hollow by Pencil First Games. Kellen, tell us about Beez.
As we identified in the upfront, we thought it was funny that we literally just got this game to the table, given that it was one of the games coming out of Essen last year that I was excited to check out. And this is Beez. And that is spelled Beez, pronounced Beez. And it is part of the sort of Azul line from Next Move Games? Is that what they call themselves? Which is sort of, they use these 4-letter words to make really beautiful, lighter, sometimes abstract games. Reef is in this line, Tuki is in this line, and then Azul 1 through 17 is also a part of this line. Beez is perhaps, I struggle with the hyperbole because I feel like if we combine all of the hyperbole over the years that, there'd be like a clip show of me saying this is the best ever, and then we'd get, I don't know, the universe would break. But Beez could be the best production of a board game I've ever seen. Full stop. I mean, again, this is a sub $40 game. This has these hives that are double layered and have some like translucency on them. You've got a custom insert that is blue and adorable and all the bees fit in. You've got plastic bees. You've got really nice little pieces of wood. Just look at pictures of this. You can see why I was intrigued by it last year. You can see why I wanted to purchase it, which I did. And you can see probably through the gameplay why I didn't like it, but I'm still keeping it so that I can try it with Christina. What you do in Beez is very, very simple. You have a bee, and that bee can't go forward. I learned something in bees, which is that bees cannot go forward. They never go forward. I don't know why.
Do they only go back?
No, they can go any direction but forward, Mark.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's billed as somewhat of a programming game, but essentially you have a map, and that can be set up for 2 players, 3 players, 4 players, and you are trying to fulfill specific objectives that are randomly assigned at the beginning. There are 3 public objectives, and you have some private objectives, and those objectives are like every red resource that you collect is worth 2 points at the end of the game. Or have in your little hive thing, have 3 in a row in a specific pattern, but they all have to be different colors. And that'll score you 3 points per one of those that you have. And then you move your bee around. But the way that you move your bee around that's so weird is that on your flanks, it's what is the normal board? An octagon? No, it's not.
Hexagon.
It's a hexagon.
Yeah.
Is it a hex?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. I'm intelligent. With the hexagon, if you want to go backwards, because this is the easiest way I could refer to a hexagon, you go exactly 3 spaces, okay? And then collect anything that is adjacent to you. So each tile has a main resource in the middle, and then 3 resources sort of flanking it. So if you land directly in the middle, you're going to get 2 resources, which is that middle one, and then one of the 3 flanking it. Otherwise, if you just land in sort of the general area, you're only going to get 1 of the resource that's on the outside. Then if you go rear left or rear right, you're able to go 2 spaces or 4 spaces, your choice, but not 3 spaces. Then if you go front left, you go 1 space or 5 spaces, or front right, 1 space or 5 spaces. So it makes it almost a programming affair where you're having to figure out where you're going to go 2 or 3 moves from now in order to land in the exact spot that you want. What makes this increasingly weirder or more different or more interesting, perhaps, if you're into this sort of puzzle, is that where you can place the cylinders that you get is also dictated by what move you took to get there. As in, if it's a 3, there's a specific spot in your thing that a 3 can go. So not only do you have to try to want the red resource, but I need to collect the red resource with a 2 or a 4 in order for me to put it in the spot that I want on my board. It's not complicated. I probably spent longer explaining it here than I did teaching it to Neelan. I think it's kind of easy to see. You pick up the little bee, and it's written all around the outside is the directions that you can go and how far you can go. I think this is fine. I think this is beautiful. I really want to try it with Christina just to see if she likes it because of how attractive it is. I get a little tired of these sort of contract fulfillment games. It is not a contract in those words, but it just feels like we've seen it 100 times before. I'm happy to have held bees and owned bees and looked at bees. Honestly, these player boards are amazing. Neelan, what did you think of bees?
Yeah, I thought this was also, to use a word we just use a lot, charming. Like, you can't deny that there is just something so adorable about these bees. Even like the bees themselves are acrylic on top of the hexes with little translucent wings. Like, just the figures themselves are great. And yeah, the puzzle of it is something that absolutely appeals to me a lot. It's kind of like, okay, I'm going to move over here using 3 spaces in this direction and then 4 spaces in this direction, which is going to give me this color pollen and this color pollen, which I'm going to be able to place on this row of my board and this row of my board. You know, like, you can see how you're lining up those actions and thinking about them 1, 2, 3 steps in advance to get just the perfect order of them in order to satisfy each of the conditions you're getting. There also seems to be a lot of diversity to the objectives. You know, you're either arranging colors in shapes or trying to create diagonals clean across your board, which means you want a good mix of like 1s and 3s and 5s movements, or just like collecting a lot of a specific color. And if that's obviously a public objective, then there's competition around those colors or competition around certain pieces. I think that would be a lot more fierce in a bigger game, but I will say that was the one thing that was perhaps a little bit underwhelming in a 2-player game. At least it didn't feel like Helen and I were really getting in each other's way all that much. But I'm more than happy just to do the little solo puzzle on the board that Kellen's flying around and occasionally be annoyed that he stole a piece or was in the way of a piece that I couldn't get.
So where does the interaction come? It comes from potentially taking pieces before your opponents. Do you also obstruct your opponent's movement?
Yes, well, you can't land on them, but you can pass through them, so it's not that huge. It's not that big a board, And there's not that many pieces of pollen.
Does change for the
for the player
players.
count.
Yeah.
I guess I mean that in a positive way. Like, it's like there is definitely a good chance that all of the pollen of a specific color will be gone from one side of the board at a point where like, oh, well, I just needed one more pink and there's no more of it.
Okay.
It also commits one of my biggest board game sins, which is it has an advanced variant that feels super impactful, which is that if you want to play advanced, make it so that you must have all of the pieces that you play into your hive be adjacent to the first one that you play, which is quite a big difference. So then not only are you planning out where you need to go and what move you need to get there, you also have to order that. So again, this was never going to be to my taste because of what type of game it is, but I was hoping that I would enjoy it more from just the abstractness of it. But again, I really think if you're charmed by pretty games, look at pictures of this and you'll probably buy it, like I did. And that is Beez. B-E-E-Z.
Okay, so before we get on to the feature topic for the episode, we got a little bit of business to take care of here in the middle. We did a draft 2 weeks ago. We were drafting the number 301 to 400 list on BGG. We did one of our fancy draft episodes. You all voted on which of our 5 collections were your favorite. As a quick reminder, those collections were Biblios, For Sale, Newsfjord, Lancaster, and Obsession from Mark, Innovation, Ginkopolis, Bunny Kingdom, Macau, and Lost Cities by Kellen, and Monikers, Great Zimbabwe, Chinatown, Twice as Clever, and Gagong by myself. And the winner of the draft with a astounding 51.8% of the vote is Mr. Second himself, Kellen.
How does it feel?
Well, I guess the first thing I thought is, wow, has anyone ever won by this much? And my pride wouldn't allow me to go back to check, but then I went back to check anyway, and no one has ever captured more than 50% of the vote, which I did.
Even in the bonus
draft.
episodes?
No.
Okay.
Don't mention those.
What are you talking about? Actually, I didn't check that. Mark. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Innovation. Thank you to Carl Chudiak. Classic. No, thank you guys all for writing in and responding. It is always dreadfully difficult in the Discord where people are arguing about the lists. And after like 24, 48 hours, we typically know how it's going to shake out. And I've been dying to tell people that I am a winner.
As promised, one of the people who has voted for the draft will be winning a $50 gift card. And I have randomly selected this name from my top hat. Your email address begins with an M and ends with a T at gmail.com. We will be emailing you shortly. Congratulations, we will email you with how to get your prize to you. Let's get into the feature topic. We are previewing our most anticipated games of Essen SPIEL 2021. We're going to do this in the beloved format that we have not visited in a while, a top 5.
We figured the Dice Tower was sort of making this.
They sort of took our idea and kind of just been doing it more than us. So, you have to like reclaim the space.
Thanks, Mr. Delicious.
Yes. I think we should start off with Mark. Tell us about your number 5 game.
My number 5 comes from Bruno Feduti, he of games like Mission Red Planet and Diamant and Citadels. This is a 4 to 8 player game, which is sort of concerning to me. That was a strike against it. It's called Dreadful Circus, and it sort of feels like a party-style Concordia from the little bit I know of it. It's a set collection game where you're trying to build the best circus, but the way that you score is going to be based on the cards you've drafted. So everybody's going to have a different way of scoring. There's also a blind bidding aspect to it that sounded pretty interesting, where you can look at a bid when it's your turn to buy something. You can like look at a bid and decide whether or not to take it, but you have to decide at that moment before going to the next bid. So there's some aspect of like a push your luck blind bidding thing, which seemed interesting. The presentation is very, very colorful. If it turns out to be a party Concordia that plays in, as it's purported, 30 to 40 minutes, I don't think there's any chance that this is going to be a game that I love, but it does strike me as a game maybe that for when you have, 4 to 8 people and you're looking for a game to pass the time and you want to pull out a novelty, some interesting, weird game, it might fit the bill just fine. So my number 5 for Essen is Bruno Feduti's Dreadful Circus.
This one has like strange art.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a couple of photographs of this where it's like, it's one of those ones where you can't decide if you really like it or you don't.
Right. Yeah. The art has like this like sort of grotesque carnival circus sort of vibe to it. So it is weird. It's definitely a weird
like
look.
Victorian macabre, like
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
My number 5 game is very much a shot in the dark, could absolutely be terrible. There's very little information about it, but there's one thing that stood out about it for me, which is that it reminds me of a game I quite like, but am too stressed out by to play, which is Space Cadets Dice Duel. And this is Starfighter's Rapid Fire. So this is a real-time dice rolling dog-fighting spaceship game where instead of being a crew of people working against another crew of people, Captain Sonar style, where the vibe of those games is very much, I'm just going to screw things up for my team. You're just piloting your ship individually or in teams, but you are managing your own ship. So there's less of this feeling that everything is going to crumble based on the poor decisions you make. I always liked the idea of Dice Duel. It's a very, very silly game of people rolling dice frantically and then stopping to see, like, at crucial points to see how missiles are firing, how everything is resolving. And Starfighter seems like it's preserving that sort of system where you keep rolling dice in real time until it's at a point that someone says, hey, fire, we're going to resolve what's happening, and then you see what plays out. Very curious about this. The box cover is definitely a little bit garish and weird. It's kind of a Star Fox sort of vibe to it. Hard to know what the component's going to look like, but this is coming from Alley Cat, who, I've liked some of their games a lot in the past, so very curious to find out more about Starfighters, Rapid Fire.
I like the short play time. One of the things I didn't love about Space Cadets Dice Duel is just it felt like it dragged on a little too long for as rapid fire game as you want. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, this is like pitched, I think, closer to like the 30-minute window. So it just seems like you're going to be in and out. And, the thing you want from this sort of game is to play it once and be like, oh, let's go again.
Yes, right.
And
exactly.
That does not happen at the end of a game of Space Cadets because everyone is stressed out and annoyed. But yeah, that was my number 5 game.
My number 5 game that I am most excited about to either purchase or, well, I'm not going to Essen, so excited about coming out at Essen, is the next game in the 19XX series. I really like these games. I don't have enough experience with them. We haven't covered them much on the pod, but I have quite a few of them. The goal of these games is to have a small package, a smaller cost, but to pack a lot of gameplay into them. So these are games like 1920 Wall Street, 1906 San Francisco, and there is a new one coming out called 1923 Cotton Club. And it thematically, I think, is a very interesting place to be. Also, a challenging theme. It's basically about prohibition and about bootleggers who took over a jazz club in Harlem in 1923 and sort of set up an operation there. So one of the things I always look for is when a smaller game is billed as economic, that always makes me pay more attention. And in 1923 Cotton Club, everyone is trying to make their club sort of be the best club. That it has that idea of you're upgrading your club, you're advertising your club, and you're trying to bribe people to come into your club. I have read the rules, which is not something I do for games that I don't own. And it just seems like a fairly fun, shorter, typical game where you're choosing from some different actions that has quite a charming theme. There is a card in the game called the Second Amendment, where you gain money for all the weapons that you have in your club, which I find hysterical. Very odd thing, but I love what Looping Games is doing with this series, and it is hard to not buy the next one in the series when you have so many of the other ones, and that is my number 5, 1923 Cotton Club.
We should play some of these.
I tried one time at a convention. I had the Wall Street. You even read the rules for it.
I did read the rules. We didn't play it after I'd read the rules.
I have a razor-sharp memory. You don't remember that, do you?
I do remember that. I remember reading rules. I think I read it twice, and we never played it.
Yeah, that's a shame. I think they're good. I think they've never had the one that has popped.
Yeah, right.
And been like, they're
The
8
anchor.
out of 10.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But I do think they're like rock solid and not as expensive. And the box size it's not like Oink Games small, like we're doing something silly. It's just small, which is nice. I'm predicting a lot of crossover. I don't know if you guys are.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah,
so.
I would say so, most likely. I think I'm expecting one of mine on Mark's list and maybe one of mine on Kellen's list.
My number 4 is a pure nostalgia pick. And again, sort of like with Dreadful Circus, I can't imagine this will be one of my favorite games of all time when all is said and done. But one of my earliest visceral memories of playing board games is playing crossbows and catapults. As a kid, I don't know if any of you played this. This is probably before your time, but it was a thing where you built a structure, and I'm sure I was playing it wrong. I'm sure I just took the pieces out and played it and made up the rules, but you built a 3D castle, and you had like little guys in there, and your opponent would do the same across the room, like you're playing on the floor, and then you had these little catapults that you would fling missiles at the other person, and you wanted to try to not necessarily only knock down the construction, but you wanted to like hit their people. And so this is sort of the conceit behind Catapult Kingdoms, which is the same sort of thing as far as I can tell. It's a game where you are building a structure and you've got people that are you're housing in the structure, and you're firing weapons at your opponent's structure, trying to destroy it and trying to knock down their players. And the first person to knock down all of their people that are hidden behind the fortress walls wins the game. There's not much strategy to it. The weight is 1.21 on BGG, so indicating it's quite light. But I love the idea of building up a castle, like building up a 3D castle, and then like firing at your opponent's castle. Looking forward to giving this a play or two. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun.
My number 4 game is actually weirdly not that similar, but in a similar sort of vein where you have like a 3D castle, but it seems a little bit more superfluous in this case, where this is the Siege of Runedar, which is a cooperative tower defense game, sort of, which would seem super generic, but guess who the designer is, everybody? Dr. Rainer Knizia himself is the designer of the Siege of Runedar, which surprised me when I saw that. But this is a card-driven cooperative game where you have, I'm going to say, orcs and other monsters, goblins, attacking your castle, and you as a team of heroes setting up defenses and protecting your walls as they sort of pour in from all sides. I am very intrigued at the idea of Dr. Knizia giving his take on a genre that I don't necessarily love all that much in board game world, but I've certainly played a lot of in various video game iterations. So this is one that I'm going to keep my eye on. It seems like it could be cool, and I'm always up to see anything that the good doctor develops.
Interesting. This is like, there's so many strikes against this game.
Totally. But until you say Rainer Knizia,
I mean, that's literally, honestly, literally the only thing that I like about it.
100%.
Cooperative game. The title, Siege of Runedar.
Right,
come
exactly.
On. Like,
the ultra generic, like orcs versus goblins and dwarves art.
Yeah.
Like if this was anyone else, it would be straight into the garbage pile of my brain.
I'm right with you. I'm right with you. Interesting.
All right, my number 4, one of my favorite things about doing the research for these type of lists is how it leads you on Board Game Geek to just clicking through on 1,000 things and sort of going down the rabbit hole. And that fun fact that I learned today is that the designer of one of my top 10 board games of all time, Coloretto, also designed the game Awari, which we enjoyed quite a bit. His name is Michael State, and he has a really light card game coming out called Magellan Elcano. And I'm excited about this. I love Coloretto. I love a lot of the games on his list that he's designed, including Aquaretto, Zuluretto, Scotland Yard. At least they're not all my favorites, but they're all very solid. And in this game, it is very simple. There are 3 auctions happening simultaneously for 3 different ship cards: red, blue, and green. And everyone is playing cards from their hand to try to win one of those auctions. But each card can be played in 2 different piles. So it has 2 different color associations. It could be a red or it could be a green. And and everyone is using one hand to try to win as many of those 3 simultaneous auctions. Once you're out of cards, once you pass, they're sort of resolved, and players acquire those cards. You get your bid back if you lose, and then you start again. So you're trying to bid the least in order to get the most resources. But that ability to be playing 3 auctions simultaneously is fun. When you pass, you don't come back is fun. And each card being able to be played to this pile or that pile, that's fun. That's light. I like where this is going already in my head, so I'm excited to check this one out. This feels like a small card game that we will probably enjoy.
I didn't realize that this was designed by Stadt. So I remember looking at this and sort of passing over it. But if I'd realized that he was a designer, I would have been more interested. So yeah, this is a nice pick.
You knew that Owari and Coloretto was the same person?
I did know that, but I didn't know Magellan Elcano also.
Oh, maybe everyone did. I was the dummy. That is my number 4.
My number 3 is one that I'm a little worried about. This has sort of been a theme so far of my 5 to 3, is where I'm not super convinced that I'm going to love them. But this is buoyed to me mainly by the publisher. I'm a big fan of the latest releases by Spielworks. I think they always come out with strong, heavy Euro-style games. So I'm holding out hope for squaring Circleville. It also has sort of an interesting idea. Although I'm a little concerned also by sort of the blandness of the components. They are awful browns and light blues and light greens, and it sort of reminds me a lot of Castles of Burgundy, the color palette, which is not great. But the idea is based on a real place, Circleville, Ohio, which got its name from the fact that it was designed in a sort of circular pattern emanating from town square. And then all of a sudden they realized that that wasn't really an efficient way to build a city, and people were complaining it took too long to get from one place to another. So they just decided to scrap it and just go back to a regular grid system. You're playing the role of the urban sort of renovators who are squaring Circleville. You're tearing down the original circular pattern of it, and you're building up the grid system. It's got an interesting sort of rondel action selection that I think could be really, really interesting, really, really fun. So hopefully that is something that'll really cinch it for me. But yeah, I'm excited for squaring Circleville. I think Spielworks has a nice level of quality to the games they release. So I'm trusting in them. No crossover so far.
Yeah.
We're about halfway through.
They're all at the top.
They're all at the top.
The number 3 game on my list is one that has been especially hot this week, is Bitoku. This is I want to say, Japanese mythology, spirits themed game. I mean, I would say that it's a lot more fantastical than that implies, but they're absolutely leaning in that direction with sort of these spirits of the forest and this massive, beautiful board where you're playing cards that represent each of these spirits, and the art on these cards is stunning as well. The board is maybe a little bit garish, but kind of has a lot of color involved in it. And the whole premise of the game is that it is a game that plays over 4 years and 4 seasons. You're utilizing these cards and utilizing all of these action spaces on the board in order to play, well, it effectively looks like the most bits and pieces Euro ever, but there's a lot going on that involves workers, which are dice, which is a mechanic that I typically like a lot, on this extravagant, elaborate board, which seems to have a almost Gugong type level of just multiple mini games happening throughout the board. It is a stunning looking game that plays out over this 4 seasons per round, which have the most evocative names ever, which I kind of loved. You have, Kellen, Spring, the awakening of the forest; Summer, the call of the guardians; Autumn, the reverence; and Winter, the repose of the forest. And you go through these 4 seasons every year. Isn't that the most beautiful thematic experience you've ever heard of?
That's like a waste of 3 words in the rule book.
Yeah, there's a lot of charm to this. It seems like quite a heavy game, so I don't have a handle on everything that's happening in it, but a beautiful looking thing that I'm very excited to hear more about.
My number 3 game is a party game. I like to party. And many people don't know that about me, or that's the only thing they think about me. But this game is more cards for a game called What's Missing that came out in 2020. And I don't know if this ever made it to the States because I have not heard of it and it does not have that many reviews. And so the new one is called What's Missing Purple Edition, but it's just more cards. This is very, very simple, Mark. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay. Here's the game. Imagine you have a board like Telestrations, okay? Except there's like a square hole in it, and everyone draws a card, and it's an illustration, okay? Let's say it's something like the moon, okay? Yeah. And you stick that in there, okay? No one can see. And now you have to draw a picture, okay? Like with a little whiteboard around that moon, and then it's going to be removed, and you have to show the picture to everyone else and say, what's missing from my photograph?
I see.
So you have to draw like a wolf howling at the moon, or it's an umbrella, and you have to draw the rain sort of like coming around that little spot. And so the entire conceit of the game is to convince other people what is missing from your photograph. I can see why you'd want to have a lot of cards available. You know, it's one of those party games that would need an expansion, but the original is sitting at a 6.9 on BGG for 2020 release. For a party game, that's good enough. That's good enough for me to be really excited to try it. Mark, immediately, I could see it in his eyes. He's like, why wasn't this on my list? Well, Mark, it was missing from your list. What's missing is this game, the purple edition of What's Missing, my number 3.
This looks cool. This looks very interesting. It looks like one of those games where it's like a twist on a pre-existing game that is done in a fun way. So yeah, I'm very excited about this.
It's like, this is the game that we spend excessively to like import. Other people are like, no, you heavy Euro, you know, and like somehow like I'm like, no, someone get me What's Missing, purple edition. Right. I need it badly.
Are the previous editions not available? They're all overseas?
Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't got that far.
Okay.
Let's find out. Keep talking.
I'm
sorry. I don't think this is in America.
Okay. Interesting. My number 2, I would suspect is going to be on at least Nealon's list. Probably not Kellen's. Maybe Kellen's. I don't know. It's a game though.
Mark.
Yes.
There's 2 left in stock.
Get them.
Going away party is Saturday.
Yeah.
You know what the miracle of Amazon Prime is?
What is that?
Guess what we're playing on Saturday at your party?
Nice.
You know what's not going to be missing from your party?
What's missing?
But not the purple edition, because that's only at Essen. I don't think we can get that one.
Okay. So, well,
sorry, Mark.
I'll have to imagine it's the purple edition.
All right. We do not have to wait a year to find out how good What's Missing is. We will find out in less than 1 week's time. Well, no, in exactly 1 week's time, how good What's Missing is. Done. It's been ordered. We ordered it. The episode's live right now.
There you go.
Maybe we stopped. We researched. No, it's still going right now.
That's not even a Patreon exclusive. That's
ordered
everybody.
And gone. It's happening. It'll be here on Thursday. Boom.
Wonderful. So my number 2 game, I think, is going to be on Nealon's list, probably, maybe on Kellen's, but maybe not. Even though it's number 2, I am a little worried about this one as well. This is by a company that usually does it for me, Capstone Games. This is Imperial Steam.
Yeah, this is my number 2 as well.
Okay. So yes, this is obviously a train game, as you can tell maybe by the title. It's got some of the cube rail stuff going on. I don't know too much about it, although some of the early reviews have been a little shakier than I was hoping for. There is the idea that it is quite punishing, which I don't normally mind, but some of the reviews have made that into a sort of a negative light. But it's a train game by Capstone with a wonderful production, with a sort of cube rails feel to them. All these things I like a lot. We'll see how it turns out, but that's a strong foundation. I just hope it turns out well, but yeah, excited about Imperial Steam.
Yeah, there aren't that many details about this, unfortunately, like Mark said, but it is by the designer of Lignum, which I've not played, but I've heard a lot of praise for Lignum over time. It's also described as an accessible economic game, which is, I don't know how true that is and what their definition of accessible is, but it's a realm that Capstone has played in the past that I've traditionally liked, with stuff like Pipeline, for example, which just feels like that step below the scale of economic games in the realm of like an 18xx or a Brass or something like that. I also want to say that the art is by Andreas Resch, who is the Gagong artist, which also has just that beautiful, vibrant color to it. It also just looks lovely.
First crossover.
Yeah.
All right. If you thought my list would get heavier, ha 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 ha, ha, you're wrong. My number 2 most anticipated game. There's a couple reasons, okay? Before you call me the boy who cried wolf, let's just say there are good reasons for this. This is the latest game in the Cockroach Poker line of games, and it is coming to us from the original designer of Cockroach Poker. So that's the first good thing. Not all of the ones in this line have been designed by Jacques Zemet, who designed the original Cockroach Poker and also designed Hamster Roll, which is amazing for what it's worth. So that's Exhibit A. It's the right designer in this line, even though this line has missed often. Okay. Exhibit B. Okay. You ready for Exhibit B, guys?
Bring it.
Mark's not ready.
I'm ready.
Is they have tarnished the good name of Kakerlaken. Okay. Kakerlaken is... They went Kakerlaken salad. They Kakerlakened it up. Okay. And so Kakerlaken poker, they can't do. So what have they done this time, Mark? What do you think they've done? They've kept the poker and replaced the bug. So instead of Kakerlaken poker, now we've got Heuschrecken poker.
Oh, man.
Which I think is a cockroach in German, but I don't know.
Way worse poker, though.
Okay. Heuschrecken poker. So what I'm saying is this publisher... This is a plan. This was planned from the publisher. So they have got to have a good game or they wouldn't do this, right? They only have one more shot. This is their shot. Okay. Kakerlaken is dead, right? They ruined that into the ground. Heuschrecken poker. I'm actually excited by what I've read about Heuschrecken poker. A very simple game of everyone has sort of the same hand of bidding cards and 3 cards will come out from a display, and then everyone will bid on what they want to buy, and whoever bids the highest will get the thing that they want, which is strawberries, broccoli, blackberries, corn, or grasshoppers, and you're planting them in your own personal garden. Except, there's sort of the ace card, which allows you to collect more, but then there's the X card, which trumps that ace card. So if you think that your friend really, really wants that one resource, you can play your X card and get them, which is awesome. That sounds fairly static, but what tipped me to saying, oh, this could be interesting is that once you collect 3 resources of a type, that's when you bank them, right? Once you collect 3 strawberries, bank. And you're not going to do that in one turn, right? So each turn, you're going to have like a different thing that you're interested in doing. Like, I really need a strawberry this turn, and that is going to force other players to sort of reckon with you and see like where people are in the structure of the game. I think that feels like a smart combination of things sort of put together. I'm excited. I would pre-order this. If there was a way to pre-order Heuschrecken poker, I would do it. I would do it right now, even though I've been burned by some salads and other various cockroachy games that this publisher has put out. You guys are excited to try this?
I'm always excited for one of
the
bug games. Yeah, for sure. But I'll tell you what's not a bug game is my number 1 game. My number 1 game is actually...
I'm predicting that we're a crossover.
Okay, let's see. So my number 1 game is a remake? We still crossing over?
We could be, depending on your definition of the word remake.
Neil, are we still crossing over? No, okay. This is a remake of a game by Leo Colovini. Okay, so it's not a crossover. This is Eriantys, which is a remake of Carlos Magnus, which is a game that I've been wanting to play for a long time. But so Eriantys takes this game that was about, I think, it was set in the Middle Ages, and the board is very brown with a dour-looking guy on the front, and takes it to these floating islands with a much more colorful palette, much stepped-up production. From what I know about Magnus, it is a type of old school Euro that I like, where it's a lot of interesting decisions to be made, but a very, very low rules threshold that feels fresh, that has a lot of like interesting aspects to it. I know it has a little bit of the El Grande sort of turn structure. It's got a area control aspect. I've heard just a lot of interesting things about the original game, and I'd been seeking it out, but when I heard they were doing a remake of it, I decided to hold off and wait for Eriantys, which is, I think, debuting at Essen. So excited to try that out.
My number 1 game is Hippocrates. This was a Kickstarter, which I was dismayed to discover that I guess had passed me by. This is one of the designers of Toi, Alain Orban. This is a game where you are kind of actually reminded me in its description a little bit of Dice Hospital, which is the idea that you have patients that are coming in and their condition is deteriorating over time. This is set during the time of Hippocrates, so ancient Greece. But you have patients whose condition is deteriorating, and you have early doctors who are trying to cure them, and you're assigning patients to doctors, acquiring the resources that you need in order to cure them, getting new doctors. Patients that you don't treat deteriorate, and you're going through that process again and again as you're treating patients. It has a tile placing element to it where you are, I assume, creating like areas where you are treating these patients. It also has a auction system built into it based around the patients that you will be treating. So you're bidding to get patients from other players based on the doctors and their abilities you have. I'm intrigued by this. I think the reception to the campaign has been positive, and I think it is releasing later this year. That is Hippocrates.
I know Monique and Naveen of Before You Play have a playthrough.
Oh, okay,
for
great.
Anybody interested. Yeah.
All right. My number one game that I am surprised to not see on either of your lists, but that's cool. We can talk about it right now, is the new standalone game in the Smartphone Inc. universe, Mobile Markets. So Mobile Markets, which I have read the rulebook of, I like to remind Neelan of that because me reading rulebooks for games I don't own is very unusual. Mobile Markets is a spin-off of the game that uses many of the same systems, including using your player board to sort of determine what you're going to be doing for the round, a very procedural process to setting the price of your smartphones. It gets rid of the board entirely. There is no board, there is no area control. Instead, there is sort of cards that you are collecting. You are getting marketing campaigns that allow you to score points. You are getting features for your smartphones, and you are trying to sell them to actual specific customers. You know, this customer wants 5G, and this customer will only buy phones that are this expensive or less, etc., etc. So many of the same systems. What I like about this is Smartphone Inc. is probably my favorite game of the last year or two. It's definitely close. It's definitely in the top 5 of my favorite games of the last year or two. And taking this system and trying to make a different game with it is just fun to me. I think calling it a Smartphone Inc. game makes me sigh. I get it. I mean, I get it. I work in marketing. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, any game that actually features marketing, I also am more excited to try. You know, I think one of the small reasons that I enjoy Food Chain Magnate. But this is actually also available on TTS right now, which I applaud. I think really cool. There's a small Essen print run for this game. I am hoping to get this played on TTS here shortly in the next few weeks. I like everything about this aesthetic. I know some people really don't like the theme of Smartphone Inc. and Mobile Markets, which is like you're basically Apple or Google. And I think it's awesome because it's so different. And it's like, at least we're not, I don't know, building a wall or, you know, using egg yolks to build a cathedral.
How dare you? I can't wait to see what the next game in the line of the Mobile Smartphone Inc. What's the next game in the Smartphone Inc. universe?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe it's like doing keynote presentations. You know, it's like who can put on the best keynote to wow investors.
Right.
Why wasn't this on your list?
I honestly didn't even know about it. It completely passed me by.
That was what I was hoping you'd say. Neelan, you say that too. Wow, Kellen, you find the coolest games.
Yeah, honestly, mine is not that dissimilar. I saw it and assumed it was an expansion for Smartphone Inc.
Yeah.
Glossed over.
Fair enough.
It could be cool. I mean, I like that it's 40 to 80 minutes. That's interesting. But I wonder how different it is.
Yeah. Again, you've got a lot of traps here, right?
Yeah.
Like either it's too similar and then you only want one, or, you know, the pricing portion of this I like, but the area control on the board was some of the best parts of Smartphone Inc. and what we like. So, like, there is potential for this to go sideways for sure, but I know that this has already been picked up by Arcane Wonders. Maybe not picked up, but they will distribute this in the US later this year, hopefully, or early next year.
Okay. Yeah, definitely piques my interest.
That is going to do it for our lists. Thank you all so much for listening. We will, of course, keep you posted as we find out more about these games and hopefully get a chance to play them in the future. But otherwise, we're always interested to hear what you're looking forward to at Essen this year. Perhaps you're one of the few who will be attending Essen. If so, please let us know what is cool there. And tell us what other games you're looking forward to. What are the games
And
that
grab
you're
us a copy
excited
of What's Missing Purple Edition.
Exactly.
We need it to complete our collection.
If you're willing to mule all of these games to us, that would be appreciated. You can chime in on boardgamebarrage.com/Discord, which is a great community of board gamers like yourself. It is a great place to hang out and talk about board games, and we're there all too, talking about the stuff that we're looking forward to all of the time. Otherwise, you can reach out to us via email at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com or on all of our social media on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music, What's on Your Mind, Kid? Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
I am your host, the Orange Tank Nealon, and with me as always are the red and green with me as always are the red and green hosts. What am I trying to say here? Tanks. With me as always are the red and green tanks, Kellen and Mark.
Pulsar, I didn't love. Oh, Mark is
I don't
in
know
the
what's
dark.
going on with these lights. Hold on.
Mark has moved to a new gymnasium, and he has to jump around every 10 minutes or the lights go out.
They keep turning the lights on.
And you're thinking,
up, rather.
well,
He has to
this
keep putting another quarter in the squash court.
What?
Isn't that
No
a
one
thing?
knows what a squash court is. Is that a
Well, I know
vegetable?
what a squash court. No, the squash is the game that is the superior predecessor to racquetball, which is the least inventive name for a sport ever. What
got
do we
a racket.
do with this ball? We got a racket. I guess it's
have a
called
ball.
racquetball.
Wow, Nealon. You're being very rude to America.
To my future country.
Yeah, to your future country.
Okay. So that may happen again because the light is like, there's like a sensor, so I guess I got to wave my arms or something when they.
Oh, really?
What?
We thought it was the squash ball court that you had to put a new quarter in.